So we're going to have a little fireside chat. The topic for this is green production for African food security. In an increasingly food insecure region, sustainable food production is obviously critical to Africa's future, whether that comes to how we use local supply chains, minimize waste, and leverage those innovative solutions, even in packaging. And, we've deliberately put this after lunch, obviously, so that this doesn't leave you too hungry. Now, obviously, that change starts from the farm. So, Alexander, let's start with you. At present, despite widespread food insecurity in the continent, Africa throws away almost 40% of the food that it produces. That's obviously a lot of waste. How can farmers minimize that? How do firms like yours aim to keep that waste low as products go to market?
Yeah, it works. Great. Thank you so much. So maybe a bit of an introduction behind Greenspoon, and it's not a commercial, but Greenspoon is an online supermarket. That means we source from a lot of farmers directly, and we pool everything in a central distribution warehouse. And what we see is that you mitigate already a lot of that waste and that you would initially have by distributing to smaller supermarkets, right? To smaller retail stores, because everybody wants full shelves, right? Everybody wants shiny capsicums, everybody wants shiny products, but the reality is at the back door of a supermarket, there's a lot of waste, right? And that can go up to 10% for many categories. Like there's the demands of the customer lead to a very big price if you want to see that from a retail perspective, right? And then for the rest, there are so online helps, right? Because online you pull demand from a central facility. The nice thing about online is also that you can do optimal storage, right? So we don't have to make very nice presentable shelves. We need to bring the product to the customer in the best possible state that it can be. So that's one. And for the rest, there's a lot of investment that needs to be done in pooling and in also cold chain transport, right? A lot of science needs to be shared with each other, because a carrot, if you just put a carrot here, it will go bad. I mean, you at KFC must know everything about it, the iceberg lettuce. I mean, if you put a carrot here, it will go bad. After a couple of hours, you will already see a significant deterioration, right? And you can also measure it. But if you store it in optimal conditions, it can even go up to 2 weeks, right? And that was also always what I tell my team in Kenya, when people say, yeah, we cannot store product X, Y, Z. And then I always say, like, okay, we are shipping avocados all over the globe by boat. We are shipping all these products all over the globe, and we are able to do it because of optimal storage, right? So it's investment in storage technologies. And
Sia, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, how do you minimize waste across the supply chain? So from the farms all the way to when it gets to our chicken burgers?
Well, for us, actually, it's more of a challenge in Africa from a prepared food perspective. So at Yum, across 15 countries, we've got a program called Harvest. So because as you prepare in the prepared food space, it doesn't matter how efficient you are, there is food surplus that is generated. So this food, if it doesn't have a home, it actually becomes waste and it ends up in a landfill. And so the program that's been running in these other 15 countries, annually, there is about 2,000 tons worth of food that is able to be donated. We have a challenge then in Africa in that legislation, there is no clear legislation around guiding how to donate food without liability to companies like ourselves. And I mean, for the time that I've been with Yum KFC, we've been figuring out in terms of what the other acts that exist, like the CPA, the FCDA, and what would it mean from a liability perspective for us is if we could then have our governments being a bit more forward and supportive to entities like us in terms of creating the acts which are called Good Samaritan laws, which would protect then companies like us and then induce us to fast track the food donations from that surplus that will always be there, because no process is ever 100% efficient.
And then I want to come on to the question of packaging. Obviously, you guys are both in more consumer-facing spaces. That's something you deal with a lot. Where I live in Lagos, they've actually made styrofoam illegal, which is, it's technically illegal in terms of how you can eat food. It's very common. Single-use plastics also very common, partly for hygiene reasons, but there's got to be innovative ways around it. What will it take for us to see more sustainable packaging across the market? And perhaps, Sia, you can kick us off with this one.
Well, that is a reality already, at least for us, and I think a lot of big corporates in Africa. So over the past couple of years, we started with trying to get better plastics, but those plastics end up in the ocean, like straws. They end up in landfills, and they don't decompose as well. So we've had a massive investment behind moving out of plastics, especially in consumer facing packaging, because we don't know where it will end up. So it is costly, and also, I mean, post-COVID with the e-commerce pressure on demand for delivery, paper became more and more expensive. So moving away from plastics into paper was a big commercial challenge. So if you believe that doing good is good for business, you will find a way, which has been our approach. And we've been able to, on an annualized basis, remove about 600 tons of plastics from our consumer-facing packaging. So the technology is there. You just need to have the appetite and partner very well with suppliers and find solves for the cost that comes with it.
And Alexander, how about you?
What our approach always has been in Kenya, what we spoke about earlier before this session, is that we are still building a lot of elements of the entire supply chain, right? So waste handling is one of the things. And what we have explicitly decided not to do with Greenspoon is to go after all the latest compostable, which is not scalable, it's imported. A lot of paper-based products in Kenya, there's no local paper production, is imported. So we have been talking to the waste handlers and say, like, okay, end to end, what are the type of products that you can work with, right? What are the type of products that you can work with, and what has the lowest total impact? And transport is a big factor of that. And then blending in food safety, right? So of food safety and food waste. So if the iceberg lettuce, people hate that it has a plastic wrap. Mm-hmm. But do people also hate that small plastic wrap, which is in total grams, like 5 grams, you know this kind of things better. 5 grams, if the iceberg lettuce has actually 90% bigger chance, or whatever, 300% bigger chance of actually ending up on someone's plate. Mm. Right? So these kind of trade-offs. And I mean, what waste handlers will tell you is the simpler, the better, right? The more fancy type of plastic combinations that you're trying to make with parts biocompostable, it gets very complicated. So keep it simple, keep it predictable, and educate the consumer. We have many customers who say, "I don't want any plastic." Like, yeah. It's a very, very, very short-sighted way of looking at it.
Okay, I think we do also have time for some audience questions, so have a think about that if you have anything you want to ask these guys. Also, what can consumers be doing? I mean, we all buy food, whether we buy online or in supermarkets. A lot of us buy KFC. I'm definitely one of your customers. But what can we be doing as consumers to also shift our attitudes when it comes to sustainability around food?
I think especially in Africa, there's a lot of consumer education that has to happen, because what we found is that, so obviously we're part of YUM, and we've got commitments around what we need to do from a sustainability perspective, and doesn't matter where you are in the world, we all have to play our part. In the more Western world countries, the consumer actually is asking more for sustainability, and also there's legislation pushing, investment behind technology for sustainability. Whereas what we've seen in our market is there isn't that much consumer education around sustainability, and there's a lot of pushback. Like, for instance, our first bold move was we said we don't want plastic straws. We're going to get in paper straws.
And that's controversial one. Plastic straws are controversial. Okay.
The backlash that we got from that, even though we had been paying 4 times more than what we did for the plastic straws, but we then learned that as we make these big changes, we do need to take the consumer along on the journey, and probably take a bit more time to not just make the switch for the sake of making the switch, but also make sure that we replace the not so sustainable material with one that at least will still deliver a good customer experience, because you have to balance then the doing good versus a good experience for the customer. Yeah.
And how about you, Alexander?
Yeah, I mean, these kind of things are not easy, right? Yeah, education is important, right? But it's in the small things that you can do, right? Don't lecture the consumer, but tell them about the trade-offs that we're doing, right? And I think a very important platform there is LinkedIn, what we use, and also in Instagram, right, where we say like 25% of our advertising budget goes to advertising that is related to sustainability, right? And that can be features that are longer than 10 seconds, but that explain a bit longer what the trade-offs are, right? And so, for example, we have imported 3 electric vans from Japan at Greenspoon, which is absolutely unaffordable, right? Because of tax over tax in Kenya, at least. And then some customers say, like, yeah, I only want to be delivered by the electric van.
Come on.
I also would have loved that we could do that, but it's not feasible, right? So you need to see the consumer as someone who actually understands something, and take the time to have a couple of certain topics that you are big on, whether that's plastic, whether that is food waste, whether that is electric mobility, and then pick that topic and over time start explaining more. Because if you would ask an average Kenyan that has heard anything about Greenspoon, it's like, oh, so you deliver with electric vehicles, right? which is interesting, right? So there are certain points that do stick.
I want to ask also about, still on this waste question, cooling technology. I mean, so much about keeping food, making sure that iceberg lettuce doesn't go a little funky on its way, is about keeping it cool. But I'm thinking about the energy demands that we have in the region. I'm thinking about the fact that lots of people who are doing this farming might not necessarily have access to cooling technology. How are you, whether that's helping farmers deal with that, or also just educating farmers on where cold chain technology comes in for them when it comes to minimizing waste?
Yeah, so this is very interesting. I think KFC will probably buy from more large-scale farms than we are doing, right? So at large-scale farms, they have global gap certification, they export. So the cooling facilities are typically
minimum
top-notch, right? They are using big transporters to transport the goods. So no problem there, right? I mean, the business case is quite feasible. What we see is when we work with small-scale organic farmers, who don't even know whether they have a market. If you're going to tell them, yeah, you need to invest in this, and like it needs to be this, and it needs to be this, and this, and this, and it's not going to work, right? So there are many innovative ways to actually cool down already a bit, right? So the problem with a lot of fruit and vegetables is if it gets above a certain temperature, it will deteriorate very quickly. But there's, for example, stuff with charcoal and wind that cools down naturally. There's stuff with water filtration, pumping. There's a lot of things that you can do at least to get temperature stability before you go to full temperature integrity, right? I can imagine with KFC, there was data loggers every second that tell which temperature the chicken has been in. Yeah, right. So that's for a smallholder farming. It's not feasible. But do we only want large corporations farming?
Sia, anything to add?
Well, for us, from a cooling technology perspective, it's more around distribution. So, like what you said, is we tend to work with bigger, farmers with deeper pockets. We've invested behind, sustainable practices in their farms. It's how do we. The biggest burden, on CO2 emissions is, transportation and cooling at DCs. Is how do we use technology like solar, battery-powered trucks, etc. So that's the work that we're doing with our distributors. How do we partner with them, and in how we contract with them, that we almost induce investment in those sustainable technologies. Yeah.
I know I did say we had time for a question from the audience, but I also can't see any on the screen. I don't know if that's a tech thing. Okay, I guess we're not going to have questions from the audience. Thank you so much, Alexander and Sia, for joining us today, and looking forward to all the rest of the panels.